Hello, and welcome to another episode of Arts First podcast. I'm Wendy Earle, and my co-host and technical supremo is, as ever, Niall Crowley. Arts First, as you may know by now, is a podcast dedicated to promoting freedom of expression in the arts and celebrating art for art's sake. In this episode, our focus is on antisemitism in the art world, which is posing a threat to freedom of expression, as well as carrying the potential of something even more sinister. The savage attack by Hamas on a music festival in Kibbutz in Israel in October 7, 2023, was not subject to universal condemnation as one might expect. Rather, it seems to have exposed a scene of antisemitism, including in the arts world. Not only did the massacre trigger vocal support among many celebrities for the Palestinian cause, it led to Jewish artists, particularly if they had expressed pro-Israeli views, being ostracised and cancelled. The art world should be seen as a safe space, to coin contemporary terminology, for Jewish artists, but the opposite seems to be the case. What is going on? Why, if you express support for Israel, are you seen as fundamentally tainted? This is an incredibly fraught discussion, and in this, our first episode on the topic, we just begin to scratch the surface of the issue. But we are planning more episodes, so please do bear with us and keep listening. So, to begin our conversation, Rosie Kay will outline the evidence of anti-Semitism in the arts that she found when researching the issue. Rosie Kay is a British choreographer. She co-founded Freedom in the Arts with Denise Fahmy after experiencing cancellation and discovering just how prevalent the practice is in the arts. Their stories were told in one of our first podcasts last year. She is also co-founder of Artists Against Antisemitism UK, which was set up after Hamas's brutal attack to highlight the problem and provide support for Jewish artists. Also taking part in this episode are Manik Govinda, an independent writer, commentator, mentor, arts advisor and curator, and like Rosie, a co-founder of Artists Against Antisemitism UK. Maya Amrami, a multidisciplinary artist and a doctoral student at the University of Arts London's Creative Computing Institute. Manik and Maya took part in an event in Warsaw, Poland last year which addressed antisemitism and challenges to freedom of expression in the arts. A link to this is included in the Substack notes for this episode. And Maya Amrami is exhibiting work at an exhibition which Manik is curating along with the artist Mina Kupferman at JW3, the Jewish Centre in North Finchley, London, from the end of March. And finally, we have Jonathan Baz, an accountant, a self-made and prolific theatre critic with his own website, and a Jew. He has found himself increasingly aware of anti-Semitism in theatre over the past few years. Rosie, what can you tell us about the recent exposure of anti-Semitism in the arts?
I'm just going to give a little introduction into the general climate in the arts that all artists are having to navigate. And then I'll look more closely at the evidence we've encountered on anti-Semitism. The current climate is a culture of fear and ideological conformity, and it's increasingly shaped by ideological pressures. And it's where political allegiances and activism often takes precedence over artistic freedom and open discourse. So since setting up Freedom in the Arts, I've supported nearly 100 artists over the past year and a half. Those are individual case studies. Perhaps 10% are actually Jewish artists. But then we also conducted a survey recently, which we'll be announcing the results of in May. So I've got some really most up-to-date data to draw on. Many artists, a majority, describe a culture of fear and where certain viewpoints are unwelcome. And cancellation is a constant threat. So self-censorship has become a survival strategy. So there's a culture of growing hostility towards artists who challenge any prevailing narratives, particularly on sensitive issues. But the sensitive issues that can include sex, gender, race, and many geopolitical conflicts. The publicly funded art sector seems, in the UK particularly, seems to have adopted particular political positions, and they often align themselves with progressive activism while sidelining alternative perspectives. And there's an expectation to conform to certain ideological stances, particularly on identity politics and social justice. In terms of anti-Semitism, the cases I've worked with have included people from publishing, the music industry, the visual arts, curatorial, all swathes of the arts. One of the worst instances is anybody that has anything to do with academia. So there's big concerns around campus anti-Semitism, with pro-Palestinian encampments outside university buildings following October 7th. They felt very much that the support for Jewish students has been ignored, and there's a lack of institutional response to Jewish concerns, while other political causes were readily supported. There's asymmetry as to who gets support and a hearing, and who's the kind of what we'd call the sort of sacred beliefs and identities, and those that are absolutely dismissed or ignored. We discovered with Artists Against Anti-Semitism UK that there was an institutional political bias in arts institutions' political messaging. Quite soon after October 7th, we noticed that a lot of publicly funded arts organisations issued one-sided political statements, defending one side and neglecting a balanced viewpoint. There's a concern that arts institutions have taken a political role, alienating Jewish artists, Jewish staff, and Jewish audiences. Another thing we've identified is that there is big attempts to silence discussions on Israel. That there are often cancellations with the excuse of security concerns, but it does seem that there's a concerted suppression to suppress discussion involving Israeli or Jewish speakers. Often that opposition doesn't just come in person, although there have been protests, for example, outside JW3. There's also quite a lot of social media pressure, open letters. There's an atmosphere of like quite profound intimidation that aims to make organisers self-censor. And finally, my point would be there's a reluctance to address anti-Semitism. People admitted they avoided discussing anti-Semitism. I've experienced this myself when issues around EDI come up. Anti-Semitism, it's not only reluctance to address it, it actually can just be thrown out as an issue. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Rosie. That was very helpful. Maya, would you like to come in now and say a little bit about your own experience of anti-Semitism, what you've been dealing with?
Yes, I can really relate to what Rosie said, especially the kind of atmosphere in academia, since I'm doing a PhD. At the beginning, it felt, I think overall, at least where I'm from, the mindset is to try and be compassionate towards everyone. And I think they've put a message on their website that we have students from both sides of the conflict, and we want you to be mindful and respectable and respect everybody's origins, etc., etc. But of course, that's also something that perhaps is needed, a box ticking. It is hard to know what exactly people feel because, like Rosie said, there is fear that if you don't align with a type of way of thinking is more widespread, more trendy, I'd call it, then you'll be attacked or you'll be cancelled. Specifically for me, my experience was that I got a lot of hate on social media, on my Instagram account, as a result of posting my pain regarding the Israeli women who were raped, and men, and children. I was just stating facts. Unfortunately, I got a lot of hate as a result. I made art from that hate. I was the one who received hate for being in pain. Not everybody chooses to engage with social media. And I understand that when I engage with social media, I basically open myself up to be a target. It was very painful. I'm Israeli. I have family in Israel. I know people that died in the Nova Party. I know people who know people that died or were taken hostage. We all know we are so small that it's bound to happen that 1,200, 1,400 people who died, got injured, raped, and taken hostage, we're bound to know someone. What I received in response to the whole ordeal with the hate speech that I received, with the work I've done around this theme, was I was accused of hate speech. I was accused of hate speech because I said Hamas was rapists and savages. The people who accused me really tried to get me out of the institution. They also said stuff like UAL has great relationships with the Arab region and with Palestine, and that this kind of work is going to hurt their feelings. You mentioned earlier that there is one-sided stance. I agree. By the way, they offered me the option. They said, why don't you do this work on hate on the other side? Because if you do it on the other side, then you'll get a postdoc, you'll get funding, people will stand in line to work with you. And I think that's your answer in regards to the one-sided approach. If you're Israeli or Jewish and you come across hate, you're not going to get a platform for work that discusses this hate. Nobody wants to know about anti-Semitism. They know it exists in private conversations, but not publicly. What we've seen in the Saatchi Gallery, the fact that Saatchi Gallery allowed this kind of platform for someone who's clearly sending anti-Semitic messages, in a form of art. I didn't attack anyone in my art. I spoke about the hate speech targeting me. I was doing personal work and I got targeted for it. You've got someone doing political work, which is anti-Semitic, according to the definition. It's been removed so far, but it was sold and it made a big fuss, etc., etc. It was shown. It did have that effect. It was presented whilst I basically had to hide. After all this ordeal, I had to hide for a while. I was scared as well. I was really traumatized by this response. The whole discussion became political. I was attacked in that discussion. It was very disheartening. It was very painful. I went into hiding and I was offered to present it in Poland. When those people heard that I'm going to Poland to present it, they said, oh, you're going to a neo-Nazi right wing. So straight, these associations of you're Israeli, that means that you're right wing, that means you're a type of Nazi. All of this, all these inversions, all these blood libels. I think I said something in the conversation about the rapes, and then they responded, these people that I've spoken to, which are senior academics. Said the reason why they were raped was because of 25,000 dead Palestinians, which it happened before. But that's the kind of rationale that keeps coming up in conversations. There's no dialogue. They also sent me materials from Columbia and Berkeley University about dialogues. When you read the manifesto of the dialogue, you can see the very one-sided approach, again, with the words genocide, apartheid, all these buzzwords in relation to Israel. I did say this is not the way to conduct a dialogue, to accuse people and completely ignore the side of the Israelis.
It does sound like it's been incredibly frustrating and painful for you because of the rampant unfairness of it, like blaming the victim, one of the major things that have been going on in this idea that somehow Hamas is justified and is serving Palestinian interests, whereas Israel was asking for it and deserved everything they got. And I suppose the thing that's frustrating about that is there's no scope for argument about it. Pushing back is not an acceptable thing to do, as far as many in the art world, in society as a whole, doesn't seem to be wanting to hear the other side. Manik, you've been following it. You work quite closely with Maya and other artists.
Yeah, I mean, there's an anti-Semitic incident where artists were cancelled literally the day before the opening of their show in Hackney in East London summer last year. And it clearly illustrates what Maya has been talking about. So there's two Russian female artists who are under the umbrella name of the Pomidor Art Group. And they're both former Moscow-based artists. Polina and Maria left Russia in 2022 to come to the UK because of the invasion of Ukraine, and free speech being constrained more and more in Russia. It became illegal to criticize Putin, so they escaped the Russian regime. So they were due to exhibit a very achingly hit gallery in Hackney called in July last year, 2024. Their exhibition was abruptly cancelled one day before the opening because the gallery received notification of inappropriate behavior on social media. One of the artists, Maria, she's was living in Moscow, but she's of Israeli citizenry. And after the 7th of October, she posted her horror on social media, terrible evil Hamas meted out on Israeli soil on the 7th of October. She expressed her support for the Israeli hostages and their families. A young Israeli woman, probably knowing people at the Nova Festival, a real sorrowful expression of the horrific experience that Israelis faced on that day. Nothing hateful, absolutely nothing hateful. The director of the gallery urgently called them in for a meeting to account for for one of the artist's posts. It was reported on Index on Censorship that the gallerist wanted the Pompidou Group to sign a joint statement with the gallery to condemn the Zionist regime. Your exhibition will only happen if you write a joint statement with the gallery condemning the so-called Zionist regime. The artists refused to do that and were kicked out of the gallery space and told to pack up and go. So that's a clear example, I would say, of anti-Semitism. Neither of their work is about Israel. If anything, it's about the Russia authoritarianism and the heavy-handed, well, the dangerous situations that artists find themselves in Russia if they speak out against Putin. That's the work they were creating to exhibit. Thankfully, another gallery in Hackney called Not For Sale Gallery came to the rescue and opened the doors to give them an exhibition at their space at Hackney Wick. I reviewed that for my blog if anyone wants to look at it. It was a very moving exhibition. Another clear example, not on UK soil, but as Maya indicated, in Poland, the day before our discussion on the 29th of February, a group of curators and workers at the Jostowski Gallery, Jostowski Castle Centre for Contemporary Art, wrote an email to the directors of the castle protesting about our discussion. And it was quite outrageous what they were saying. One of the senior curators actually said in an email that the content published by the castle on the occasion of our event is manipulation and ignores the fact that much of the information on the internet about the 7th of October committed by Hamas were found to be untrue. So they actually denied what happened on the 7th of October, the Nova Festival, or that it was that many of them died by friendly fire by the IDF. It was that kind of arguments they were posing, trying to threaten that there would be protests outside our discussion. Maya, as a British Israeli artists were never given the platform to discuss their thoughts and feelings about what happened. We were probably the first, and I don't know if there's been any others, public forums, public spaces, where Israeli artists were able to speak openly and honestly about their thoughts and their position as Israeli citizens. And I think, this one-sidedness, there's lots of discussions about Israel and its so-called occupier state and its so-called genocide against Palestinians, all these emotive terms, the buzzwords, which are actually encouraged to use. As Rosie indicated, some of the letters we sent out as Artists Against Antisemitism to publicly funded arts organisations started to dig deeper and found out that there was quite a lot of liaisons with certain Arab-based British organisations, actually giving them resources on what terms to use when they were condemning Israel. And it's very clear that it is ideological.
John, well, you work in a very different field from the visual arts. So could you give us some insights into your observations of anti-Semitism working in the theatre?
Sure. So, as a critic, the concept of being kind doesn't necessarily apply to us. I'm a Jewish critic, so I bring my own perspective on what's like, and my take on anything that I see is fine, being what I see. Whilst I'm Jewish, I'm not a particularly orthodox Jew. And as I've learned over the years, is more and more people will come and talk to me, and only recently I've chatted with a Jewish producer who's actually really sounded uncomfortable manifesting her Jewish identity. It did not work, really uncomfortable. And sort of on another side of that coin, a non-Jewish producer is a very motivated person for supporting good Jewish theatre or good theatre, if I look at the output of her work. And she tells me how she struggles to find a place in New York for a piece of Holocaust-themed Jewish writing where no theatre wants to touch it. Anti-Semitism in the theatre is interesting as far as the productions themselves. You have shows that clearly have anti-Semitism as part of their storyline, as part of their narrative, you only have to look at Cabaret, which tracks the rise of the Nazis, Fiddler on the Roof, one of the most popular musicals ever, all about the pogroms of Russia and the dispersal. You've got The Producers, where Mel Brooks took a fantastically brilliant, genius comic spin on one of this most ghastly episodes of the 20th century. And then you've got The Merchant of Venice, which, albeit a fictional story, draws from perception of how Jews were perceived in the 1500s, whenever Shakespeare wrote it. Excuse my brief moment of ignorance there. Drawn from aspects of history. Those are shows that have anti-Semitism as part of what they're all about. What I've become increasingly sensitized to and found the confidence to call out is more dog whistle anti-Semitism that can manifest in productions you wouldn't necessarily associate as being anti-Semitic. For me, and this was a point that got debated in a number of national newspapers, the Lehman trilogy, which charted, to be honest, as a piece of drama, technically it was world class. I'm assuming a number of people here would have seen it. If you have, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, it's 3 actors playing a variety of roles that trace the Lehman brothers from their arrival in the United States from Germany in the mid-1800s through to their creation, through to their trading history, being very profitable business people, all the way through to the creation of the bank, and ultimately the collapse of the bank. 3 actors, 3 men play all the roles. Throughout the performance, there are 2 key visual themes that drive the play. One is that these 3 actors are clothed in traditional Jewish garb of the mid-19th century. The other visual aspect is the use of bankers' boxes, cardboard boxes that you store documents in our office. As you may remember, when Lehman Brothers collapsed in 2008, there was television news pictures streamed both from London and from Wall Street. The unfortunate people who worked for Lehman Brothers were filmed coming out of the offices carrying their bankers' boxes full of their knickknacks, pictures of wives, husbands, girlfriends, their mobile phones, their office knickknacks in a banker's box. That image of hundreds of people streaming out with bankers' boxes is very clearly associated with the collapse of Lehman Brothers Bank. And so throughout this production, you have this continual visual association of Jews, the 3 men in the garb, and the bankers' boxes, which are used from the mid-19th century all the way through to the late 20th century. It's a very strong visual association. When you then consider that the last Lehman to ever sit on the board of the bank, I think it was Bobby Lehman, but please feel free, someone to shoot me down if I've got that wrong, who died in the mid-1960s. And the bank, of course, collapsed in 2008. There was 14 years when there was no Lehman representation from the family on the board whatsoever, but the brand had continued. But if you were to see this show, you wouldn't necessarily make that association. And there is a dog whistle anti-Semitism that I think permeates that technically brilliant play from start to finish. You then get other pieces of theatre where the anti-Semitism or the anti-Jewish, anti-Israel arguments are quite manifest. Giant opened last year at the Royal Court. John Lithgow playing Roald Dahl in a play that was written around a horrendous book review that Roald Dahl wrote. I think it was the time of the 1982 Israeli conflict in Lebanon, where Dahl was incredibly anti-Semitic in his writings. The play is set then. It deals with his literary agent coming to challenge him, see if he'll do a retraction. Ultimately, spoiler alert, he doubles down. But what the play does, and what I found quite uncomfortable, is giving a platform for tropes of the 1980s to be aired again in the 2020s. I was one of the few critics that expressed, again, artistically brilliant. John Lithgow is up for an Olivier. Other people in the play are up for Olivier, so Elliot Robert Gary. John Lithgow is outstanding. His acting is outstanding. But the argument of the play I found, frankly, troubling. Only recently in London, we had the play What We Talk About When We Talk About Anne Frank, written by a Jewish writer, as was Giant. that seeks to take a liberal Jewish critique of Israel, ultimately uses the word genocide as to what Israel's actions are in Gaza. And I despaired that this is the level of argument that recently, Wendy, you and I went to see A Knock on the Roof, a play at the Royal Court, where Giant came from. A Knock on the Roof is a fictitious story of a young Gazan woman and how she deals with the bombs that are falling down from Israeli military action. There's no explanation as to why there's Israeli military action going on, nor is there any criticism in the writer's work about criticizing Hamas for having embedded fighters and military assets in amongst the civilian population, nor is there any reference to why aren't Hamas opening up this network of tunnels that they built under Gaza to defend their population. I think we're all aware that Hamas are quite happy to see their civilians die in conflict because it creates such fantastic media coverage.
What you're saying is really interesting about how there's a definite role that certain sections of the theatre world is playing in promoting anti-Semitism. And that's one of the things I wanted to go on to exploring, the unbalanced response within the arts world to the October attacks. We could have seen that coming. It exposed something present in the art world belief system. It's worth, maybe we should just tease out a little bit more. That's what is at the center of the prejudice now. Is it the same kind of anti-Semitism that motivated the Nazis, or is there something else going on? Because traditionally, I've always thought of anti-Semitism as being a kind of a right-wing fascist mentality.
It's anti-Semitism, I think it's fair to say, as has been famously said, is a very light sleeper. One only has to look at the history books to see the connections between the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, the Muslim leader, and his meetings with Adolf Hitler to understand where the ideology was coming from. You then really need to look at, since Israel's creation, all of the conflicts that it's fought broadly. Some you could say were a little bit more defensive in their essence, but from the day it was born, its neighbors sought to wipe it off the map. And to a large degree, that hasn't really changed.
It's an interesting question. I also want to explore the fact that within Jewish people and Jewishness and Judaism, there's diversity of opinions about the state of Israel, about the conduct of the state of Israel, about the IDF, about, what we could have done better, about generally the fact that we came back to our historic land. Was it a good decision? There's so many opinions. And I think being essentially a democratic country with lots of flaws allows for this kind of diversity of thoughts to occur. And that's how you get people like Yuval Avraham, who came in last week to the Oscars and spoke about the Palestinian suffering without mentioning the suffering of his own people in the country that he lives in. I was talking to a friend saying, on the one hand, it's a great property to have. It's a great characteristics that we have that ability, to constantly question ourselves and sometimes internalize the hate. We sometimes believe our perpetrators that we deserve that, or we're bad, or we're this and that. There's many reasons. We become self-haters. People have done PhDs on that, I'm sure, about anti-Semitism, about the psychological effects, about the trauma. The thing is that, when you have this kind of diversity, it also causes the haters that hate us from within can be related to geopolitical power. It can be relating to old hatred that has never gone away, to what you're talking about, the right-wing type of people. But I think essentially what happened is that we lost a grip on how we're being talked about, how much people can abuse us, and dealing with our own terminologies we allowed others to do. I think it's a shot in the leg because we add some more fuel to this fire. I do believe that it is a mutating virus, like it is being described. We need to be very careful and attentive and compassionate towards each other and towards our differences in opinions. Because, like I said, when Yuval Avraham went and said what he said, he damaged me. He damaged my child that goes to a Jewish school and my neighbor who goes to the synagogue, and many other people that believe in different things and practice different levels of religiousness. Some of them are completely secular, some of them are atheists, but they're still Jews. And they get hurt every time a Jew or an Israeli talks against themselves. It's just another material for the haters. And I don't know how to solve it. I don't have answers. I have more questions. But I think it's a very difficult situation. And if there was a way, at least from the government, to kind of bring an overarching approach to this, it's not free speech, it's hate speech. If there was a way that it could have happened, then maybe we would have been in a different situation. But it's not. It's escalating. It's growing.
I sympathize with what Maya's saying. And when Hamas killed Jews, they didn't care if those Jews were peaceniks living in the Gaza envelope. Many of the people who were massacred were the most loving of Israeli citizens towards the Gazans who lived the other side of the fence. Hamas didn't care. They wanted Jewish blood, full stop. They didn't care where it came from. And I think it's important to note that the liberal Jewish voices that Maya refers to with despair, and I share that despair, have caused so much damage. Yes, of course, the worst person is the guy with the pitchfork in his hand or the axe, firebrand, who's killing a Jew with his bare hands. But for me, next up on the order of people who I detest are self-hating Jews. They have done so much damage. Dr. Sheila Nazarian, who's a Persian Jewish activist based in California, describes a harsh talk that she gave to a group of hostage families in Israel. She said to them, "Why didn't you listen to us, the Persian Jews, when we told you what these Islamists will do? They do not share your core values. Why did you not listen to us?" And she said that a hostage stood up and said to her as a reply, "Our religion wasn't Judaism. Our religion was peace. And our religion has been shattered." And I read that and I thought, God bless the peaceniks as individuals, but my gosh, so much damage has been done in terms of incoming friendly fire.
We haven't got much time because I put a strict limit on this. I think what you just said, Jonathan, is very powerful. And Maya, you both talked very powerfully about the challenge we face. I do think that we need to continue having this discussion and putting the information out there, and I'm committed to doing that. I think what we should do now is just do a final roundup of comments and realise that we can't say everything, but we will be coming back to this subject again and again. Rosie, do you want to say something?
I had some things to say about some of the possible reasons, and I think intersectionality's got a lot to blame there in terms of its sort of decolonial viewpoint on the world, positions everybody either as oppressor or oppressed, and it's a terrible ideology, particularly in the arts. But I wanted to make a couple of points about possible solutions. One thing that Monique and I and the artists that we work with are calling for is to reinforce institutional neutrality and political independence. Institutions have got themselves into an absolute mess with this. Free speech, freedom of expression has gone out the window. It wouldn't be hard to bring in institutional free speech charters into institutions and funding agreements. And I think also like a focus on the best art rather than the most politically correct art would also be great. I think Maya's point absolutely spot on about establishing the difference and the understanding of between free speech and hate speech, because I've seen now more and more people of, say, sort of the pro-Palestinian protesters are using free speech to justify what we could conclude is hate speech. I think there could be more protection for artists. That's really hard. Artists are always the most vulnerable. They're so easily cancelled. They're so easily ostracised. I think that's absolutely appalling. And then I think there should be more education across schools, colleges, particularly in art schools and in arts institutions, really try and foster a a sort of spirit of better debate and artistic pluralism.
Manik, a few brief words and then on to Maya.
I think we need another hour, but the origins of anti-Zionism, for example, is Soviet Union based, and how they scapegoated the Jews who were not feeling the communist ideology, perhaps. And so that's another debate to have, and how that has crept into left-wing anti-Semitism. But it's so complex, this. But I would say, when people say go back to Poland, Russia, or Lithuania, or Germany, that European Jews don't belong in Israel, it's just nonsense. That whole idea of repatriation is racist. It's the same argument that the British National Party would use. So I think that's what, we need to kind of tell these so-called progressive leftist cultural artists, that they are using the same argument as the British National Party.
Maya, your final thoughts.
I just want to echo Rosie's words about education. I think it's key, the right type of education, because we see that, at least at the academia, they really put it in their heads that living in the West means you're a colonialist and it only belongs to the West. It only belongs to the white person. They associate Jews as white, even though it's not factually right. We are in a pickle here. Something needs to change in that respect, because Jewish people are indigenous to that land, and generally as a people, the fact that we managed to survive, thrive within that belief system is a miracle, really. It needs to be protected. I don't see any other way of looking at it. I really think it's all down to the lawmakers, the government. If they're not going to put an end to it, we're going to find ourselves again and again. And there's no clear kind of boundary at the moment as to what is right and what is wrong. I've given this example of LSE, London School of Economics, hosting a talk about Hamas sympathizers. They basically were told, and they admitted it in one of the paper, that they're not allowed to say they sympathize with Hamas, but they can still say they're being vilified. This is what I'm saying about free speech being manipulated, being used in the wrong way to support terrorism, to support terrible acts of a vile organization, anti-Semitic organization, and they've killed not just Jews, as you know. So I really think these kind of things should be not allowed in a country that is supposed to safe keep their citizens, and they're not doing it.
I'm just going to echo Maya's words. We're in a pickle, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much to all of you for participating in this discussion. It does feel like it is the kind of discussion that should go on a lot longer, but we will be coming back to it with other examples and considerations. I suppose a question I would leave for everybody is, why is it that Jewish identity is the one identity that's not okay in terms of minority identities? That the idea of defending everybody's identity becomes so strong, and yet the idea of defending Jewish identity is frowned upon so widely. So I think that's a discussion for another time. Thank you everyone for participating in this and helping us to kick the discussion off.
Thanks for listening to Arts First. You can subscribe and listen to all of our episodes at our Substack website, and you can find that at artsfirst.uk, or you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on our YouTube channel. Please give us a like or review us on any of those channels. That would be a great help. If you'd like to help with donations, then please see our Substack donations page. We'll see you next time.